You're going to get a great deal of information about music associated with the Appalachian region from the Malone article, but I wanted to give you a more detailed introduction to the kinds of musics that came together to create the old-time music or folk music associated with the Appalachian region to set up the scene for the Malone article. There are a variety of styles of music that are performed in the Appalachian region, but we're going to focus on the old-time music, which is the more stereotypical music associated with Appalachia. So what we see at the end of the 19th century and the early 20th century is a combination of instruments from the first peoples that were there and the African Americans as slaves and then as freed slaves, along with the spirituals and work songs associated with the slaves and the newly freed slaves. The mouth harp is an instrument that shows up in some old-time music. The banjo, certainly an instrument that's prominent in old-time music. And all of those musical elements get combined with music brought by European immigrants, which include their fiddles and ballads and folk songs. So here's an example of the mouth harp being performed by Buffy St. Marie. So you'll see that it's a bow with a string that she plucks and then is able to sing along with it. So that's certainly an instrument and a sound that's associated with old-time music. The banjo is an instrument that's often assumed to be an instrument created by white people in Appalachia, but it actually has roots in Africa, and it's slaves bringing it over in the 16th and 17th centuries. So this video gives a brief introduction to the early banjo and gives us an idea when we really start to see it in the historic record.
The gourd body, tuning pegs, and flat fingerboard of an early gourd banjo, but seems to lack its short thumb string. Therefore, we cannot say with certainty that these are early gourd banjos either. It's really not until the early 1700s that banjos begin to clearly appear in the historic record. For example, we have a banjeel reported in Barbados, 1708, the banjur in New York, 1736, and finally the banjo in Pennsylvania, 1749.
So that gives us an idea of when we start to see African Americans with banjos in the United States. Another rhythmic characteristic of old-time music in Appalachia is something called patting juba. And I've got an example here of someone performing patting juba, which is using the body as a percussion instrument. And we can see people doing that in the old-time traditions, either on their bodies or using spoons or some kind of wooden or metal objects in their hands. One of the ways that people got to know about old-time music in the Appalachian region was through ballad collectors and folk art schools. Olive Dame Campbell and her partner Marguerite Butler were founders of the John C. Campbell Folk School in Brasstown, North Carolina. Olive Campbell had started collecting ballads in the Appalachian region by traveling around and getting people to sing for her. And she would write down the melodies and the words. And Cecil Sharp came along afterwards with his secretary Maud Karpelis and did the same kind of thing. And they put these songs into collections, and eventually Cecil Sharp published these so that others could have access. One of the interesting things, though, was that they really focused on this being ballads and songs associated with the British Isles. So they cherry-picked the kind of music that they wanted people to associate with Appalachia and left out the First Peoples and the African American traditions in this. The folk music festivals did a similar kind of thing in sort of cherry-picking the music and making it seem like a whites-only kind of musical style. The White Top Folk Festival that took place from 1931 to 39 in Grayson County, Virginia is a good example of that. The organizers of that really did not want those festivals to be associated with what they called unwanted influences like the blues, which essentially meant African Americans or any people of color. Another way that people got to know about old-time music was through recordings, and the Bristol Sessions in Bristol, Tennessee did a great deal for old-time music. Ralph Peer was a talent scout and a recording engineer with Victor Records and collected music, and he made an announcement that people could get $50 and make some money off their recordings if they came to record. And the Carter family, that's the way that the Carter family became well known in the United States, was through these recordings. After they made the recording, they got played on the radio all the time, and despite the fact that they rarely left Southwest Virginia in the early part of their career, they became known all over the United States as Appalachian performers. In this picture, you see A.P. Carter and Sarah and Maybelle. And Sarah and Maybelle were more of the performers. A.P. was more like the song catcher, who went out and found the songs and brought them back for them to sing. So they were together for a while, then split up, and Maybelle went on to have a pretty prolific career after they broke up. It's interesting as we get into the 30s that we start to see record companies playing a role in pigeonholing certain kinds of music by having records that were called race records that were associated with black artists, and then hillbilly records, which became white versions of the old-time music. And despite the fact that that's not how the old-time music really got started, that it was much more diverse, it was the recording industry that really started to build up stereotypes around this kind of music. All right, so this is a brief introduction. The Malone article will give you a lot more information.